Guys, have you ever gone to the refrigerator, opened the door, then looked over top of the door or around the door, depending on what kind of fridge you had, and yelled out, "I don't see it"? Dear, it's that big jug right in front of your face. It's called milk. You ever done that? Where you look and you look and you look and you still missed it. I want to talk about missing stuff today. In particular, I want to talk about, as Ron did last week, about how that star that shone so bright in the sky was only seen by the Magi. Everyone else in the whole Eastern world didn't see the star. They missed it. Even as bright as it was, they missed it. And so today we're going to talk about missing Christmas. But as we do that, I want to begin by reading the Christmas story, because I think we all need to think on this as we get into our message today. Luke chapter 2. And some of you probably have it memorized because you watch Charlie Brown and you listen to Linus. In those days, Caesar Augustus issued a decree that a census should be taken for the entire Roman world. This was the first census that took place while Quirinius was the governor of Syria, and everyone went to his own town to register. So Joseph also went up from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea to Bethlehem, the town of David, because he belonged to the house and the line of David. And he went there to register with Mary, who was pledged to be married to him, and was expecting a child. And while they were there, the time came for that baby to be born. And she gave birth to her firstborn, a son. She wrapped him in cloths and placed him in a manger, because there was no room for them in the inn. And there were shepherds living out in the fields nearby, keeping watch over their flocks at night. An angel of the Lord appeared to them, and the glory of the Lord shone around them. And they were terrified. But the angel said to them, "Do not be afraid. I bring you good news of great joy that will be for all people. Today in the town of David, a Savior has been born to you. He is Christ the Lord. And this will be a sign to you. You will find the baby wrapped in cloths and lying in a manger." And suddenly there was a great company of the heavenly host appeared with the angel, praising God and saying, "Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace to men on whom his favor rests." When the angels had left them and gone into heaven, the shepherds said to one another, "Let's go to Bethlehem and see this thing that has happened, which the Lord has told us about." And so they hurried off, and they found Mary and Joseph and the baby who was lying in the manger. And when they had seen him, they spread the word concerning what had been told them about this child. All who heard it were amazed. And they said to them, "But Mary treasured all these things and pondered them in her heart." And the shepherds returned, glorifying and praising God for all the things they had heard and seen, which were just as they had been told. How can anyone miss that? That's the story that many of us have probably heard hundreds of times over the years. Every year at this time, we definitely hear it. It's the story. But I want to share with you that I believe today most people miss Christmas. And they miss it every year. There are 7.9 billion people in this world. 7.9 billion. How many of that number do you believe understand and or believe Christmas as you and I do? Folks, listen, that sounds a little strange. It seems impossible to miss Christmas. Listen, you would have to be blind and deaf to miss Christmas, right? Because from Thanksgiving on, sometimes before Thanksgiving, this year started at Halloween. The Christmas music started in the stores. And people started putting up their Christmas decorations. It all happened that quick. How can you miss Christmas? Between Thanksgiving and December 25th, it's everywhere you look. And yet I'm convinced that most people miss it. They observe the season because culture says it's the thing to do. But the vast majority of people are utterly oblivious to the reality of what they're celebrating. Christmas has been so fantasized, so secularized, that people today are numb to the marvel of God being born in the flesh. Because that's what it was. Jesus, the birth of the baby, God with us, Emmanuel. John MacArthur wrote a book. It's called God with Us, A Miracle of Christmas. And in that book, he tells about a story about a 2-page spread in the newspaper featuring some man-on-the-street interviews where people offer their opinions about the real meaning of Christmas. The views expressed range from mawkish to irreverent. Some were sentimental. They would say things like, Christmas is family time. It's a time for children and things like that. Others were humanistic about it. Christmas is a time to celebrate love for one's fellow man. You know, the idea of giving and things like that. Then there were some that were just crassly hedonistic. Christmas is just an excuse to party. Just another day to get drunk. Not one person in that 2-page spread mentioned the marvel of Christmas. Namely, that God was born in human flesh. And so with answers like these, folks, it's no wonder so many people miss Christmas. That's something that hasn't changed since the time of Mary and Joseph. You see, people missed that first Christmas too. No different than people today missing that time. They were busy. They were consumed with all kinds of things, some important, some not. But most of them missed Christmas. They didn't see the star. The similarities between Mary and Joseph's world and our world, it's not a lot of difference. They're pretty much the same. Every one of those people that missed Christmas 2,000 years ago has a counterpart today that misses Christmas. Today, I just want to note some of the people who missed that very first Christmas. And maybe as we go through this, you will think of people in your life that you know are missing Christmas for the reasons they miss Christmas. But more importantly, maybe it speaks to you because you're missing Christmas. First person I want to talk about that missed Christmas was the innkeeper. The innkeeper, the Bible doesn't specifically mention him by name, but that night in Bethlehem, the innkeeper was confronted by a man and his very pregnant wife. Women been pregnant in here? By the time you got to your 9 months, were you happy? Oh! And you just traveled from Nazareth all the way to Bethlehem on foot, donkey, or cart, some way you got there. Are you going to be happy when this innkeeper says, sorry, we got no room for you? I think I'd rather face the wrath of God than the wrath of Mary that night. Because you know she wasn't happy about it. Had to be very upset. The innkeeper turned them away because he had no room for them. Listen, not only did he turn them away, but yet he didn't even call or try to find someone who could help her give birth to her son. She had to do it all by herself, out in a stable. Now, we need to understand the Jewish people in that first century, this innkeeper, he wasn't mean and nasty. Because they weren't barbaric people, they were just filled up. You know, these Jews weren't like some of these tribes that we hear about where they send their pregnant women off into the jungle to have their baby on a banana leaf. Wasn't anything like that. The Jewish people were very civilized and intelligent and educated. And above all, they were very hospitable people. They cared about human life. So it would have been highly unusual for a young woman about to give birth to be turned away from an inn and left to give birth alone in a stable. And yet that's exactly what happened. Luke says this in chapter 2, verse 7. He says, and she, being Mary, gave birth to her firstborn, a son. She wrapped him in cloths and placed him in a manger because there was no room for them in the inn. Now, the Bible doesn't specify what kind of inn the innkeeper had. The Greek word, when you look at it in this text, it means a guest room, it means a hostel, it means simply a shelter. So the inn could have been anything from a full-fledged precursor to our bed and breakfast to a lean-to out in the field where people and animals would stay. But whatever it was, the hospitality that Joseph and Mary sought from the innkeeper was unavailable to them. And they were turned away. And the result was that innkeeper in Bethlehem, he was the first one to miss Christmas. So why did the innkeeper miss this first Christmas? Very simply, he was preoccupied. He was preoccupied. His inn or his guest room or his lean-to shelter was full. It was the census time in Bethlehem, and the city was bulging with people from all over the country. Kind of reminds me of what happens when all of us from the north goes to Florida for the winter. Those little towns of 300 grow to 1,500 because we infiltrate those little villages and towns. That's what happened here with Bethlehem. All these people came because of the census. It was crowded. And the innkeeper was busy. There was no indication, listen, there's no indication in Scripture that he was hostile or that he was upset or that he was mean to Mary and Joseph. He just didn't have room. And that was it. Because he was just busy. He was just busy. The innkeeper was exactly like so many people I know today. Do you know anybody during this season that's a little busy? Are you a little busy? People consumed with activity? Now listen, we're not talking sinful activity. We're just talking, they're busy. There's all kinds of things going on. They're active with things that keep them going. Working, shopping, parties, concerts, studying, school activities, and other things that all compete for our attention. And in the clutter of activity, many preoccupied people miss Christmas. They miss the Son of God coming to earth, born in a stable, laid in a manger. God in the flesh. How many of you know someone is so preoccupied right now they miss Christmas? But more importantly, are you so preoccupied that you're missing Christmas? That was the innkeeper. He was too preoccupied. He missed Christmas. Here's a second group that missed Christmas. Here's a whole group of people, and it was the entire city of Jerusalem. It was the Jerusalem citizens. Out of the whole society of Jerusalem, God picked this little band of shepherds to hear the good news of Jesus' birth. Now, this is intriguing because shepherds were among the lowest and most despised of all social groups in the Jerusalem area. The very nature of their work kept them from entering the mainstream of life, if you will, in society. They couldn't observe all the holidays and all the religious festivals and feasts of their day because they were busy watching their sheep, so they couldn't jump in and join everybody else. But most likely, listen, these shepherds were probably very close to Jerusalem because these sheep that they were watching probably were the sheep that would be bought and used for sacrifice in the temple in Jerusalem. Interesting. But listen, this is what I love about God. God in His grace. Can we hear an amen for God's grace? Oh, love God's grace. In His grace, this is what I love. He allowed the shepherds to be the first to know about the birth of His Son. And immediately, the shepherds went to Bethlehem and found Jesus. They were overwhelmed at what they had experienced. And we're told in Luke chapter 2, verse 17, the shepherds spread the word concerning what had been told them about this child. And what's so cool about this is you look at verse 18, all who heard it were amazed at what the shepherds said to them. But, big but here, but no one went to check it out. No one went to the stable. No one went to see this story that they had just shared. No one looked for themselves. Only those lowly shepherds didn't miss that first Christmas. Everyone else in Jerusalem, they missed it. They didn't see the star. It's absolutely amazing that no one in Jerusalem took any notice that Jesus was born just a few miles away in the town of Bethlehem. Bethlehem was literally within walking distance of Jerusalem, and Jesus' birth was a fulfillment of all that the Jewish nation had hoped for. But the entire city of Jerusalem missed the birth of Jesus. Not a person in Jerusalem saw the star and wondered what was going on. So why did these people in Jerusalem, why did they miss that first Christmas? You might be surprised by this answer. Religion. The people of Jerusalem were very religious people. Man, it was the hub of the religious activity in Israel. The temple was in Jerusalem, so if you wanted to offer sacrifice, you had to go to Jerusalem to the temple to do so. And what happened is these people were so busy with the religious rituals that they missed the reality. Consumed with activity of their feasts and festivals and ceremonies, they missed the whole message. In short, they were busy worshiping the right God, but in the wrong way. They were caught up in the externals of true religion, but had abandoned the heart of faith. Jesus didn't fit in their system. They looked for the Messiah that would be a conquering hero, not a baby in a manger. You know, they hoped for a leader who would support their religious system, but Jesus pretty much, listen, as he grew up, he pretty much opposed everything it stood for. He offered them a truth that would set them free from that tyrannical, demanding, oppressive, legalistic religion the scribes and Pharisees had put around their neck. But the people were so established in their religion that they wouldn't listen. People like that, listen, they're the hardest to reach. They're hardest to reach with the good news of salvation that came through the birth of a baby, because they're so determined to earn their own salvation, to prove that they can be righteous on their own and that they cannot see the depth of their spiritual poverty. We're blinded by religion. Can I just tell you today that religion can be a deadly trap? I truly hope you're not here today because of religion. I hope that you're here because you have a relationship with the one and only person who can change your life and give you eternity. It's a relationship with Jesus that we're talking about. Religious activity is not the same as a genuine righteousness or a genuine relationship. Religion damns people to hell just as much as immorality does. They had all kinds of religion in Jerusalem, but they still missed Christmas. You know anybody like that? You know any very religious people? They go through all the actions, but yet they miss Christmas. They miss the birth of the Son of God. The innkeeper was preoccupied. Citizens of Jerusalem were too focused on religion. And here's a third person that missed that first Christmas. His name's Herod. Herod, Matthew tells his story. Herod was different than the innkeeper. He wasn't preoccupied. He was very well informed. And Herod actually pretended that he wanted to worship Jesus. But in truth, he was afraid. He was afraid of the one who was called King of the Jews. Herod didn't want any competition. He didn't want anybody messing with his throne. I like how Matthew records it in Matthew chapter 2, verse 3. He says, when King Herod heard this, the thing that he heard was that there's one born king of the Jews. When he heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. The phrase that he was disturbed in the Greek, when you look at that, it means he was agitated. He was stirred up. He was shaken up. It's like a heavy-duty cycle on your washing machine. When that agitator really gets going. That's what it was like. The word conveys the idea of panic. And Herod panicked because his supremacy was in jeopardy. He had no use for any other king, in particular a king of the Jews. You see, if the innkeeper's problem was preoccupation and the citizens of Jerusalem were too religious, too focused on religion, then Herod's reason for missing the first Christmas was fear. Fear. Herod immediately felt threatened, even though Jesus was a baby and Herod was an old man. Herod's panic and paranoia are legendary. Listen, I'll tell you a little bit about Herod. He had 2 wives and 12 children. And one of his wives, named Miriam, had a brother named Aristobulus, who was a high priest. Now, Herod was afraid that Aristobulus was going to try to take his throne, so he murdered him. He murdered his nephew. And then he killed Miriam too, his wife, his favorite wife. Any ladies here going to be Herod's favorite wife? I don't think so, right? Listen, then it said a little later he was afraid of the 2 oldest sons that might take his throne, so he murdered both of them. His entire life was plotting and execution. 5 days before his death, 5 days before his death, he executed his surviving oldest son for plotting against him. And then he had one final act of how evil this guy was. He had the most distinguished citizens of Jerusalem put in prison. And he commanded that they would be put to death immediately when Herod died. Because listen to what he says. The people will not weep when I die, and I want them weeping, even if they're weeping over someone else. Wow. So even at his death, there was a great slaughter. Herod was so brutal, such a merciless man, that it is not difficult, if you understand the history of Herod, it's not difficult to imagine how he would choose to vent his rage when he learned that there was a king of the Jews born. It really was nothing for him to put word out that every child 2 years and younger be put to death. In his effort to wipe out one child, he killed scores and scores of children. But meanwhile, when that's all going on and they're killing those kids, God had already warned Mary and Joseph, didn't he? He set them up and he said, Joseph, get this woman and get your baby and get out of here. Go to Egypt. And they fled to Egypt with Jesus. And so Herod failed to kill the only one he was trying to kill. See, not only did Herod miss that first Christmas, his rebellion propagated a great tragedy. And it's all because of fear, a jealous fear. Now, when you think about Herod and his fear, it's hard to equate that to people around us today, isn't it? You know anybody that treacherous that would take the lives of that many babies and all? No, I don't know anybody like that, but let me tell you how the fear comes into play here. We have a lot of Herods today. Herod's fear was that someone else would take his throne. There are a lot of people who are afraid to give up their throne. They won't allow anything to interfere with their career, their position, their power, their ambition, their plans, their lifestyle. They're not about to let someone else be king in their life. You see, they see Jesus as a threat. And so they miss Christmas too. Does that hit home anywhere today? Are you sitting on the throne of your life with all of your goals and all your ambitions, or is Jesus sitting on the throne of your life? That's the question. People see Jesus as a threat, and so they miss Christmas too. But can I tell you, I pray that no one sitting here today or watching us online misses Christmas this year. And I pray that you never miss another Christmas. Not because of ignorant preoccupation, not because of ritualistic religion, not because of a jealous fear. Because you see, those are all just mere expressions of the main reason that people miss Christmas. Unbelief. Unbelief. You know, I'm just thinking here this morning that maybe some of you have missed Christmas. Oh, you get your presents. You make sure of that, right? Make sure we get and give presents. We do that. Most of us eat a big dinner when we're doing the Christmas thing. We decorate a tree. But is your heart any different than it is any other day of the year? Is it no different than the innkeeper or the citizen Jerusalem or Herod? You're missing the reality of Christmas? It's my hope and prayer today that you don't miss the reality of Christmas. For many years, whenever Christmas pageants are talked about in a certain little town in the Midwest, someone is sure to mention the name of Wallace Perling. Wallace's performance in one of the annual productions of the Nativity has slipped into the realm of legendary. But the old-timers who were in the audience that night never get tired of recalling exactly what happened when they watched that program. Wally was 9 that year. He was in the 2nd grade. Should have been in the 4th grade. Most people in town knew that he had difficulty keeping up, and he was bigger than most kids he hung around with. He was clumsy. He was slow in his movements and in his mind. And still, his class, of all whom were smaller than he, had trouble hiding their irritation when Wally would ask to play ball with them or to get involved in any game in which there was competition and somebody had to win. They didn't want Wally on their team. Most often, they'd find a way to keep him out. But Wally'd hang around. No, he hung around. He wasn't sulking. He was just hopeful. And he was always helpful to anyone who came around that was an underdog. He was willing and he was smiling. And he was the protector of those underdogs. Sometimes if the older boys chased the younger ones away, it would always be Wally who'd say, "Hey, can't they stay? They won't be any bother." And Wally fancied the idea of being a shepherd with a flute. I didn't know the shepherds played flutes, did you? But he wanted to be a shepherd with a flute in the Christmas play. But the play's director, Miss Lumbar, assigned him to a more important role. After all, she reasoned the innkeeper did not have too many lines. Wally's size would make his refusal a little more intimidating for Joseph. And so it happened that the usual large partisan audience gathered for the town's yearly extravaganza of beard and crown and halos, and the whole stage was full of squeaky little voices. No one on stage or off was more caught up in the magic of the night than Wallace Perling was. They said later that he stood in the wings and watched the performance with such fascination that from time to time, Miss Lumbar had to make sure that he didn't wander on stage before it was his time. Then the time came when Joseph appeared, slowly, tenderly guiding Mary to the door of the inn. And he knocked hard on the wooden door that was set into the backdrop. And Wally, the innkeeper, was there waiting. "What do you want?" Wally said, swinging the door open with a burst gesture. "We seek lodging." "Well, seek it elsewhere." So Wally looked straight ahead, but spoke vigorously. "The inn is filled." Sir, we have asked everywhere in vain. We have traveled far and are very weary. There is no room in this inn for you." And Wally looked real stern when he said that. "Please, good innkeeper, this is my wife, Mary. She is heavy with child and just needs a place to rest. Surely you must have some small corner for her. She's so tired." Now, for the first time, the innkeeper relaxed his still stance, and he stood and he looked down at Mary. He looked at her with his pause, long enough that the audience got a little tense about what was going to happen. And from the sides, the prompter says, "No, be gone." And so, "No," Wally repeated automatically, "be gone." And Joseph sadly placed his arm around Mary, and Mary laid her head on Joseph's shoulder. And the two of them started to move away. But the innkeeper did not return inside his inn. While he stood there in the doorway watching the forlorn couple, his mouth was open, his brow creased with concern. His eyes were filling with tears, and everybody could see it. And suddenly this Christmas pageant became different from all the others. "Don't go, Joseph," Wally called out. "Bring back Mary." And Wallace Perling's face grew into a bright smile, and he said, "You can have my room." Can Jesus have your room? Can the baby come to your house this year? Can he, as he lays in your manger scene under the tree, have space in your life, in your heart this year? God with us, the marvel of Christmas. And what's so awesome about this story is because Jesus came. He now offers us, Jesus, the Son of God, offers us the opportunity to be children of God as well. I love what John says. Chapter 1, verses 11 and 12. He says, "He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Yet to all who receive him, to those who believe in his name, he gave the right to become children of God." This Christmas, please don't miss it. If we were to put a 2-page paper together and ask each of you to give us your reason for the real reason for the Christmas season, would you be able, with your heart, to say, "I know exactly what it is. And in my house, it's all about Jesus"? You know, since my wife is gone, I'm not going to be home, probably not through Christmas season. I'm thrilled about that, okay? My Christmas decorations will stay in the attic of the garage. I don't have to decorate a thing. So I will not get caught up in the glitz and glam of Christmas. It's not going to be there. Christmas will be about the baby. Jesus came for you and for me. Don't miss Christmas this year.